The tent flaps rattled against the desert wind as Sergeant Clay Harrison studied the mission briefings spread across the folding table. Satellite images, wind charts, and hastily printed maps covered every inch of the metal surface. The amber glow from overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the faces of 6 men gathered around the table, all staring at the same grainy photograph. "High-value target," Commander Brooks announced, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Sector 19. Time window less than 10 seconds before he disappears into a fortified compound." Harrison scratched his jaw and let out a low whistle. The photograph showed a narrow alley between 2 concrete walls, barely wide enough for a man to walk through. Beyond that, a heavily fortified building that looked more like a bunker than a safe house. 2 miles out, Harrison muttered, tracing the route with his finger. "Angle's terrible, and those crosswinds in that corridor will be murder." He tapped the image of a jagged concrete barrier. "This wall cuts our line of sight down to maybe 5 seconds. 5 seconds maximum." Corporal Marcus Webb scoffed from across the table. "That's if you're already locked on target. You'd have to be some kind of magician to make that shot work." The other men nodded grimly. They'd all seen impossible missions. Before bad angles, worse intel, shots that seasoned snipers wouldn't even attempt. But this felt different. This felt like a suicide mission disguised as an operation. "It can't be done," Harrison said finally, meeting the commander's eyes. "Not with the window we've got. And if we miss, we blow the whole operation. Every hostile in that district will be pointing guns our way before we can extract." "Commander." Brooks remained silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The generator hummed outside, and somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled with static. Finally, he spoke. "That's why we're not sending just you." Before anyone could ask what he meant, the tent flap opened with a sharp snap. Cold desert air rushed in, and with it came a figure none of them recognized. She was tall and lean, wearing standard desert fatigues without any unit patches, rank insignia, or name tape. Just a dark baseball cap pulled low over her eyes, and a plain rifle case in her hand. She didn't speak, didn't salute. Her eyes swept across the table once, taking in the maps, the wind charts, the photographs. Then she stepped closer and set her rifle case down with a quiet thunk that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The room shifted. 6 pairs of eyes studied her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She looked to be in her early 30s, composed and calm, but there was something in the way she moved, a stillness in her posture that suggested she never wasted motion. "Gentlemen," Commander Brooks cleared his throat. "This is Agent Viper. She's here to assist with the shot." "Assist?" Webb raised an eyebrow. "Sir, unless she's carrying a guided missile in that case, I don't see how—" "Enough," Brooks cut him off. "She's here because she's the best." The words hung in the air like smoke. The best? None of them had ever heard of her. In a community as tight-knit as the sniper corps, reputations travel fast. You knew who was good, who was great, and who was legendary. This woman wasn't on any of those lists. Harrison crossed his arms. "No offense, ma'am, but this shot's beyond human limits." She didn't look at him. Instead, she reached down and unlatched her case. The men expected to see a standard military rifle, maybe an M2010 or Barrett if she was going heavy. What they saw instead made them pause. The rifle was sleek and black, almost too refined to be military issue. Every component was custom machined, the finish flawless. It didn't look like a weapon built for the battlefield. It looked like something built for one purpose, a single, perfect shot. She began assembling it without a word. Each movement was deliberate and precise. The barrel aligned, scope mounted, bipod extended. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. The weapon seemed to come alive under her hands. Webb leaned toward Harrison, voice low. "She's not even looking at the maps anymore." "She already looked," Harrison replied quietly. "Probably memorized everything." When she finished, she set the rifle on the table. Its long, matte black barrel seemed to absorb the harsh tent lighting. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out a small, weather-beaten notebook, and flipped to a page covered in numbers, wine calculations, distance tables, environmental corrections, all written in quick, confident strokes. Finally, she looked up, not at the commander, not at the maps, but directly at Harrison. "What's the drop on your 338 Lapua at 2,000 meters in a 20-knot crosswind?" she asked. The question was so sudden, so precise, that Harrison blinked before answering. "About 8 meters, give or take." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Too much. You'll be off by a full torso width." "He lives." The room went completely still. She closed the notebook and began breaking the rifle back down as if her part in the conversation was over. Commander Brooks spoke again, his voice carrying final authority. "She'll be taking the shot. You'll provide cover and support." The men exchanged glances, doubt, irritation, curiosity mixing in their expressions. But no one said what they were all thinking. Who was she? And why did command think she could do what they couldn't? Outside, the wind howled against the tent walls, carrying the smell of dust and diesel fuel. Somewhere in Sector 19, their target was moving, and time was running out. Tomorrow, the mission would begin. Whether they liked it or not, she was their only chance at success, and Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to witness something that would change everything they thought they knew about the impossible. The armory tent buzzed with the familiar sounds of preparation metal clicking against metal, bolts sliding home, scopes being cleaned with methodical precision. The amber glow of overhead lights cast long shadows across workbenches where the sniper team prepared their equipment for tomorrow's mission. Harrison sat at his usual station, methodically cleaning his rifle barrel while stealing glances at the woman who disrupted their world. She worked alone at a narrow bench in the corner, her rifle case propped open beside her. Without rank insignia or unit patches, she might as well have been invisible to military protocol. "You know," Webb said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "most folks introduce themselves before a mission. It's kind of a tradition." No response. She continued fitting components together with the same smooth precision they'd witnessed earlier, her hands moving with mechanical certainty. Webb smirked and looked at Harrison. "What do you think? Is she mute or just too good for conversation?" "Drop it," Harrison warned. But even he couldn't hide his curiosity. Finally deciding to try a different approach, Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Where did you serve before?" "This assignment?" "Here and there," she replied without looking up. "That's pretty vague," Harrison pressed. "Army? Marines? Agency work?" Her only response was the faint click of a barrel locking into place. Staff Sergeant Tom Rodriguez, their team. "Spotter," gave a short laugh. "I'm starting to think she's CIA. They love the whole mysterious stranger routine." She glanced at Rodriguez just long enough to acknowledge she'd heard him, then returned to her work. The rifle taking shape before them was unlike anything in their arsenal. Its design was elegant yet purposeful, with contours that suggested extensive custom fabrication. The barrel was long but perfectly balanced, and the suppressor integrated so seamlessly it was difficult to tell where one component ended and another began. Every part of her assembly process seemed rehearsed to perfection. No hesitation, no double-checking alignment. Every component slid into place as if the weapon remembered where it belonged. When she mounted the scope, she didn't just position it and tighten the rings. She adjusted eye relief down to the millimeter, then made windage and elevation corrections that seemed impossibly specific for a weapon that wasn't even zeroed to this location. Webb couldn't contain himself. "Where's your spotter? Or are you planning to trust those magic hands of yours?" She spoke again, her voice soft but carrying an edge that cut across the tent. "Don't need a spotter." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "No offense, but nobody runs a shop like tomorrow's alum. Not with the distance and environmental factors we're dealing with." Her hands never stopped working as she made another microscopic scope adjustment. Distance and wind aren't the problem. Inconsistency is. A spotter adds another voice, another reaction time, another margin for error. I eliminate variables. Rodriguez whistled low. "You're telling me you'll read wind, track mirage, follow the target, and break the shot all by yourself?" She gave the faintest nod for a moment. The tent fell silent except for the hum of overhead lights. Even the skeptics had to admit she sounded like someone who'd done this before. Many times Harrison noticed something else troubling. She wasn't using any standard issue equipment. No military ammunition, no regulation bipod, not even a standard sling. Everything from the polished cartridges lined up beside her workstation to the range-finding equipment was clearly her own. "Where did you get that rifle?" Harrison asked. "Build it," she replied simply. The statement caught everyone off guard. Rodriguez echoed, "You built it?" She shrugged as if custom weapon manufacturing was routine. "Developed it over several years. Corrected every flaw I've encountered in other systems. Weight distribution, recoil management, thermal stability, barrel harmonics, all optimized." Harrison exchanged a meaningful look with Rodriguez. Building a weapon like this required more than technical skill. It demanded obsession with perfection. Webb snorted, trying to break the tension. "What? Did you hand-load those rounds in your kitchen too?" "Yes," she said, without looking at him. That ended his commentary. The team returned to their preparations, but eyes kept drifting toward her workstation. When she completed the rifle assembly, she didn't pack it away immediately. Instead, she placed it carefully on the table, opened her weather-beaten notebook, and began running calculations. The pages were filled with tiny handwritten numbers, diagrams, and shorthand notations that Harrison partially recognized wind corrections, range calculations, atmospheric adjustments. But much of it went beyond standard sniper mathematics. He spotted curvature corrections for extreme distances, thermal expansion factors, even formulas he'd never seen that seemed to account for humidity effects on subsonic projectiles. She flipped to a clean page, studied tomorrow's mission map, and began writing with steady confidence. Her pen never hesitated, as if she already knew exactly what conditions they'd face. Harrison's curiosity finally overwhelmed his caution. "What's all that mathematics for?" She glanced up, her eyes sharp but unreadable. "Insurance. Insurance against what?" "Tomorrow," she said, closing the notebook with finality. "You witness something you've never seen before." She stood, secured, the rifle in its case, and walked out of the tent without another word. The remaining men sat in contemplative silence. Rodriguez broke it first. "She's either completely insane or exactly what command claims she is." Harrison didn't respond immediately. He kept thinking about her hands, how they'd never trembled, how her eyes never showed doubt or uncertainty. She wasn't like any shooter he'd encountered. Tomorrow would reveal whether her confidence was justified or if they were about to watch a disaster unfold. Either way, Harrison suspected their understanding of what was possible in their profession was about to change forever. Pre-dawn, air bit sharp and cold as the sniper team moved through the city's outskirts like phantoms. The urban landscape stretched. Before them, a maze of narrow streets, crumbling buildings, and rooftops that offered both opportunity and death. Each man knew his position, his angle, his responsibility in the carefully orchestrated plan. Harrison's team would establish overlapping fields of fire from 4 different rooftops, creating a kill box around the target zone. Every angle had been calculated, every second of exposure accounted for. It was textbook sniper doctrine: multiple shooters, redundant coverage, maximum probability of success. But she had other plans. Before they reached the first building, she broke away from the group without explanation or signal. She simply veered down a narrow side street, her rifle case swinging casually at her side, as if she were taking a morning stroll. Harrison's voice crackled through the encrypted communication system. "Viper, you're heading the wrong way. Your assigned position is Sector B, Rooftop 14. Good elevation. 1.9 kilometers to target." Silence. He tried again, voice sharper. "Viper, confirm your position. You won't have a clean sight." Line from street level. Still nothing but the sound of her boots on broken pavement echoing through their headsets. Webb's irritation bled through the radio. "Guess she's too special to follow the operational plan." Harrison bit back his own frustration. This wasn't just breaking protocol, it was dangerous. A mispositioned sniper could compromise the entire mission, alerting targets or creating confusion when split-second timing mattered most. Through binoculars from his rooftop position, Harrison watched her duck into a partially collapsed building 3 blocks away from their planned firing line. The structure was a disaster: cracked walls, shattered windows, most of the roof gone. Any reasonable sniper would have dismissed it immediately. Harrison keyed his radio again. "That position is worthless. Terrible angle, no elevation advantage, and your sight lines are completely obstructed. You'll be shooting through debris." But she had already vanished inside the ruins. From the building's 2nd floor, she found exactly what she'd been looking for: a window frame with a jagged gap, where the wall had partially collapsed. Most snipers would have seen only obstacles: the terrible angle, the narrow field of view, the tangle of rusted reinforcement bars, blocking portions of the opening dot. She saw opportunity. The gap between buildings, where their target would appear, was barely visible from this position, but she could observe something more valuable: a faint heat shimmer rising from generator exhaust in the distance. The thermal distortion wasn't random. It followed a predictable pattern that could mask her shot completely. She assembled her rifle with the same mechanical precision the team had witnessed before. Every component clicked into place with quiet certainty. Once the weapon was mounted on its bipod, she didn't immediately look through the scope. Instead, she opened her notebook and began adjusting calculations based on real-time observations. Harrison watched through his spotting scope, growing more frustrated. She's not even behind the rifle yet. What's she waiting for? Rodriguez, lying prone beside him, kept scanning the streets. Maybe waiting for wind conditions to change. Maybe she's lost her mind. Webb's voice cut through their headsets. Finally, her voice came through communications for the first time that morning: calm, controlled, completely confident. "Wind conditions are stable. Locking in position now." Then, silence again. She settled behind the rifle, her cheek resting lightly against the stock. Through her scope, she could see the target zone perfectly framed: a narrow slice of alley between concrete walls, where their high-value target would appear for exactly 2.7 seconds before reaching safety. But she wasn't aiming for the traditional target areas like head or center mass. Her crosshairs were locked on a point that seemed almost absurd: the exact spot where the target's forward step would intersect with her bullet's trajectory, accounting for the delay caused by subsonic velocity. From the rooftops, the rest of the team shifted restlessly. Rodriguez whispered, 2 kilometers with subsonic rounds? That's impossible." Harrison didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on her, trying to understand her methodology. Every adjustment she made was deliberate: scope alignment, bipod positioning, even the way she adjusted sling tension to pull the rifle precisely into her shoulder. She wasn't just preparing to shoot. She was engineering a perfect shot with no margin for error. When her final preparations were complete, she exhaled slowly, letting her body settle into absolute stillness. Her breathing became shallow and controlled. Her heartbeat steady and measured. Harrison could see it now. That razor-sharp focus, that complete control over every variable. This wasn't arrogance or recklessness. It was mastery of her craft taken to an almost supernatural level. The team leader's voice came through communications. All stations report ready status. One by one, confirmations came in. Sector A ready. Sector B ready. Sector C ready. Then her voice, quiet but absolutely certain. Sector D ready. Stand by for target identification, the leader commanded. Time on target 90 seconds. The city seemed unnaturally calm. A street vendor pushed his cart down a distant road. A stray dog wandered through the dust. Somewhere far away, a call to prayer echoed faintly across the urban landscape. Through her scope, she wasn't watching the street where the target would appear. She was studying the mirage subtle distortions in the air that revealed everything about wind patterns, thermal layers, and atmospheric conditions that would affect her shot. Every second of observation refined her internal calculations, building a complete environmental map of the bullet's path. Harrison's pulse quickened. He'd made difficult shots before, but nothing like this. His position gave him nearly 4 seconds of target exposure. Hers gave her less than 3, and she was attempting something he'd never seen tried at this distance. Target moving into position, the team leader announced. Mark in 30 seconds. She exhaled once deep and slow, then let her breath settle until her lungs were half empty. The perfect point of respiratory stillness. 3.2.1 mark. Through her scope, the target stepped into view. The world seemed to slow as 2.7 seconds stretched into something measurable, something she could work with. Her crosshairs moved minutely with each heartbeat, but her mind was already calculating the perfect moment bullet trajectory. Mapped wind accounted for trigger break timed with her pulse's lowest point. She didn't blink. And she didn't fire. Not yet. The morning air hung thick with tension as the target stepped into the narrow gap between buildings. Through their scopes, the sniper team tracked his movement. A tall figure in dark clothing, flanked by 2 bodyguards, moving with the confident stride of someone who believed himself untouchable. Harrison's finger rested on his trigger, crosshairs centered on the target's chest. 4 seconds of exposure from his angle, plenty of time for a clean shot, but something made him hesitate. Taking the shot, he whispered into his microphone. Negative, came the immediate response from their team leader. Hold position. Viper has primary. Harrison gritted his teeth. Through his spotting scope, he could see her motionless behind her rifle in the ruins below. What was she waiting for? The target continued his measured pace across the killing ground. 3 seconds of exposure remaining. 2 seconds. Still no shot from her position. Viper, take the shot, the team leader commanded. Silence. Viper, do you copy? Still nothing from her radio. Harrison's training screamed at him to engage. The target was right there, exposed, vulnerable. But orders were orders, even when they made no sense. And then it happened. The target stumbled, a sudden, almost imperceptible falter in his step. His eyes widened with confusion, his knees buckled, and he crumpled to the dusty ground with an oddly graceful collapse. The bodyguards reacted instantly, weapons raised, scanning rooftops frantically, but there had been no sound. No muzzle crack, no supersonic snap, no visible flash from any direction. Nothing. Target down, Rodriguez whispered, disbelief evident in his voice. Repeat. Target is down. No audible shot fired. The team leader's voice crackled with confusion. "Viper, was that you?" A pause that seemed to last forever. Then her calm voice came through their headsets. "Target eliminated. Packing up. No explanation. No confirmation of method." Just a simple statement delivered as matter-of-factly as a weather report. Harrison stared through his scope at the scene. Below, the bodyguards were still searching desperately for a shooter, their panic increasing as they found no visible threat. The black SUV lurched into reverse as the driver tried to escape an enemy he couldn't identify. "How?" Webb muttered over the radio. "That's impossible. Even suppressed, we should have heard something." They all knew the physics. Suppressed rifles were quieter, but never truly silent, especially at long range. The ballistic crack was unavoidable unless the round was subsonic. But subsonic ammunition at this distance should have been impossible to aim accurately. Through his spotting scope, Harrison watched her disassemble the rifle with mechanical efficiency. Every movement was deliberate but unhurried, like she'd rehearsed this exact sequence thousands of times. Components went into their designated slots in the rifle case barrel. Suppressor, bolt, each piece secured with practiced precision. "Exfiltration in 30 seconds, the team leader announced. All stations moved to extraction point Alpha. Harrison slipped down from his rooftop position, his mind racing. Everything he understood about long-range shooting said what he'd just witnessed was impossible. The distance, the wind conditions, the split-second timing. No human being could calculate all those variables accurately enough for a subsonic hit. Yet the target was dead, and she had done exactly that. When Harrison reached the extraction point, a narrow alley between two abandoned buildings, she was already there. Standing casually in the shadows, rifle case at her side, she looked like someone waiting for public transportation, rather than someone who'd just performed an impossible feat of marksmanship. "You want to explain what just happened back there?" Harrison asked as the rest of the team filtered in. She looked at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "The job got done. That's not what I'm asking." No response. She simply checked her watch and gazed down the alley toward their extraction vehicle. Rodriguez arrived next, shaking his head in amazement. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen anything like that. No sound, no visible impact. Nothing. The guy just dropped like someone flipped a switch." Webb jogged up, breathing hard from his rapid descent. "Whatever you did, that wasn't normal. That wasn't even human." She turned to look at Webb, and for a moment, Harrison thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not arrogance, but a cold certainty that made him reconsider every assumption he'd made about the limits of their profession. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the mission requires methods beyond your training manual." The extraction vehicle rumbled to life at the far end of the alley, diesel exhaust mixing with the dust kicked up by its heavy tires. As they climbed into the armored truck, Harrison noticed something else unusual. She carried the rifle case, as if it weighed nothing at all, but he knew the components inside weren't standard aluminum or steel. Whatever she built was different, exotic materials, precision engineering that probably cost more than his annual salary. During the ride back to base, no one spoke for the first several minutes. The city slid past outside their bulletproof windows, its sounds muffled by armored walls. Harrison sat across from her, studying the way she rested her arms on the rifle case, fingers drumming a slow, unconscious rhythm. Finally, Rodriguez broke the silence. "You know, I've seen some incredible shots in my career, but what you did back there, that wasn't just skill. That was something else entirely." She looked up at him. "Preparation." "Preparation doesn't make a shot silent," Rodriguez countered. She didn't answer, but Harrison caught something in her expression, not defensiveness, but the look of someone who knew far more than she was willing to share. The team leader, sitting at the far end of the vehicle, finally spoke. "We'll conduct a full debrief back at base. Command will want details on the engagement." She nodded once, but Harrison suspected that whatever answer she gave in the official debrief would only scratch the surface of what had really happened in that narrow alley. As the truck carried him away from the kill zone, Harrison found himself replaying those final moments over and over. The target dropping without warning, the complete absence of sound, the impossible precision of a shot that defied everything he thought he knew about ballistics. One thing was certain: he just witnessed something that would change his understanding of what was possible in their profession. The question was whether he'd ever learn how she'd done it. The debriefing room was small and oppressively hot, with metal walls that seemed to trap the desert heat despite the laboring air conditioning unit. Maps of the operational sector covered one wall, marked with red circles and trajectory lines that now seemed almost quaint compared to what they'd actually witnessed. Captain Ellis sat at the head of the metal table, sweat beading on his forehead despite the artificial cooling. The sniper team arranged themselves around the table, restless and agitated, their usual post-mission satisfaction replaced by confusion and growing unease. The mission was a success, target eliminated, no casualties, clean extraction. But the method of that elimination was eating at them like acid. "All right," Ellis began, his voice steady but betraying underlying curiosity. "I need to understand exactly what happened out there. The after-action report is going to require specific details." His gaze settled on the woman sitting at the far end of the room. She remained calm and composed, leaning back in her chair with her rifle case beside her like a faithful companion. The absence of rank insignia or unit identification made her seem like a ghost in military clothing. "Walk me through the engagement," Alice continued, "from your perspective." She removed her gloves with slow, deliberate movements, folding them neatly before placing them on the table. Her eyes scanned the room, reading each man's stare in turn. There was no defiance in her expression, but no apology either, only the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she'd accomplished. "Do you really want to know?" she asked finally, her voice low but carrying clearly across the small space. Alice nodded firmly. "We do. My men deserve to understand what they witnessed." She took a measured breath, as if weighing how much truth to reveal. "You didn't hear the shot because there was no supersonic crack. My ammunition is subsonic, custom loaded for specific ballistic coefficients. Lower velocity eliminates the sonic boom. Combined with an advanced suppressor system, the result is complete audio signature suppression." Private Danny Torres frowned. "But subsonic rounds at that distance, the bullet drop would be enormous. They'd hit the ground before reaching the target." Her lips curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile. "For standard ammunition, yes, but I don't use standard anything. I spent years studying ballistics, not just shooting, but manufacturing ammunition grain by grain. Custom powder charges, precision bullet profiles designed to maintain velocity and stability far beyond normal parameters." The room fell silent except for the struggling air conditioner. Alice leaned forward, mirroring her posture. "You're talking about calculations. That would challenge a computer." "Computers are too slow," she replied matter-of-factly. "By the time you input environmental data, conditions have already changed. Wind shifts, temperature fluctuates, humidity varies. You have to feel the environment, not measure it." Staff Sergeant Kyle Peterson, the team's veteran spotter, raised an eyebrow. "And you're claiming you calculated all those variables in your head?" "I don't calculate," she said simply. "I predict." Her tone wasn't boastful. It was the matter-of-fact explanation of someone describing a routine process. "I studied wind patterns in that sector for 48 hours before the mission. The direction shifts every 23 minutes like clockwork. There's a thermal updraft from the eastern courtyard wall, And the temperature differential between concrete and sand affects air density more than most snipers realize. Torres sat back, shaking his head. You're describing layers of environmental factors that would take a meteorologist hours to analyze. Which is why I don't rely on meteorologists, she replied. By the time official weather data is processed, the mission window has closed. You have to live the environment, not study it. Ellis crossed his arms, still studying her intently. What about the rifle? That's obviously not standard issue. Her eyes flicked to the sleek black case beside her. Custom action, hand-lapped barrel, titanium suppressor with a specialized baffle system. Every component is engineered for stealth over speed. No muzzle flash, minimal heat signature. Virtually no recoil impulse that could affect follow-up shots. Peterson whistled low. So you're telling me you hit a moving target at 2 kilometers with a bullet that's essentially coasting through the air, and you did it by feeling the wind? She nodded once, as if the achievement were unremarkable. The weight of her statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The men exchanged glances, their skepticism gradually giving way to something approaching awe and perhaps a touch of fear. Alice wasn't finished. Why go to all this trouble? We have perfectly good .338 Lapua rifles that could have made that shot with a fraction of the complexity. Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Because sometimes, Captain, the world doesn't need to know a shot was fired. Noise draws attention. Attention brings retaliation. My way. The target falls, and no one knows why. His associates will suspect betrayal, question each other's loyalty. Fear accomplishes what bullets cannot. Ellis leaned back, his expression thoughtful. The logic was cold and calculating, but undeniably effective for certain types of operations. For a long moment, no one spoke except for the mechanical wheeze of the overtaxed cooling system. Peterson finally broke the silence. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. Thought I'd seen every technique, every innovation. Turns out I was wrong. A hint of amusement touched her eyes, but she didn't respond verbally. She began pulling her gloves back on. The conversation. Clearly over in her mind, Ellis sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, I'll put together the official report. Target neutralized, no compromise to team position. That's what command needs to know. She stood, lifting her rifle case with practiced ease. Good, because the rest doesn't belong in any report. Without another word, she walked toward the door, leaving the room full of battle-hardened men staring after her in contemplative silence. As the door closed behind her, Alice realized that her explanation, detailed as it seemed, had only scratched the surface. The true extent of her capabilities and the methods she used remained buried in classified files. They'd never be cleared to read. Somewhere in the world, another impossible target was already walking into her crosshairs. And tomorrow, another team of snipers would watch something they couldn't explain and spend years wondering how she'd done it. The intelligence office hummed with the quiet efficiency of computers processing classified data. Banks of monitors cast blue light across the faces of men who'd given up trying to solve the puzzle through conventional means. 3 days had passed since the mission, and the mystery of their unnamed sniper had only deepened. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres sat hunched over his workstation, eyes burning from hours of database searches. He'd run every combination of keywords he could think of through military personnel files, special operations rosters, even contractor databases that required special clearance to access. The result was always the same. Nothing. She doesn't exist. Torres muttered, pushing back from his keyboard in frustration. Not in any system I can access. Captain Ellis looked up from his own terminal across the room. Define doesn't exist. No service record, no training documentation, no commendations. Or disciplinary actions. No financial trail, no medical records, no next of kin notifications. It's like she materialized out of thin air for this one mission. Private First Class Jake Williams, the youngest member of their unit, spun around in his chair. Maybe she's deep cover, like contractor-level deep cover, the kind they don't put in normal databases. Ellis gave him a skeptical look. I've worked with contractors. They still have project numbers, operational codes, something. This is different. From his position near the secure communication station, Sergeant Peterson had been unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke up. I think I know what she is. Every head in the room turned toward him. Peterson's weathered face looked troubled in the monitor glow. I've heard stories. Not official reports, but rumors from guys who've done long deployments in hostile zones. There's talk about a female sniper who works outside normal command structure. Never uses the same weapon twice. Never leaves operational signatures. Torres leaned forward. What kind of stories? Impossible shots that even Delta Force wouldn't attempt. Targets eliminated in ways that don't make sense according to conventional ballistics. Always works alone, always disappears afterward. Peterson paused, choosing his words carefully. They call her the Ghost. Ellis frowned. That's not how the United States military operates. Exactly, Peterson said quietly, which suggests she doesn't work for the military. Not officially. Late that evening, when the others had given up and gone to quarters, Ellis remained at his workstation. He'd pushed beyond normal intelligence channels, using encrypted connections meant for interagency coordination. The kind of access that could end careers if misused. Finally, buried in declassified documents from more than a decade earlier, he found something. Not a file exactly, but a fragment of a memorandum stamped with red classification markings. Most of the text had been redacted with black bars, but pieces remain visible. Operative redacted will continue in unofficial capacity. Deployments to redacted and redacted authorized under executive directive. Missions will not be logged. Targets eliminated with complete discretion. No records of travel or operational activities to be maintained. Below the memo was a single code designation. Blackbird. Ellis sat back, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. He'd heard whispers about Blackbird in intelligence briefings. Supposedly, an asset capable of adapting to any weapon system with surgical precision. Someone whose allegiance wasn't tied to any single branch of government, but who could be called upon for missions that required absolute deniability. It explained everything. The silence. The lack of documentation, the untraceable weapon, but it didn't explain why she'd been assigned to their operation or why she'd vanished without a trace afterward. The next morning, Ellis's secure phone rang with an unlisted number. You're looking in places you shouldn't, Captain. A calm male voice said before Ellis could even identify himself. Ellis's pulse spiked. Who is this? Someone who knows you've been asking questions about last week's operation. Stop. I have a right to know who is operating in my area of responsibility. Ellis replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. A cold chuckle came through the phone. She doesn't operate under your chain of command. She doesn't operate under any chain of command you'd recognize. Consider yourself fortunate she was there at all. My team deserves answers. We work together. We need to know. Your team witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. The voice cut him off. File your report, take the commendation, and forget the rest. This conversation never happened. The line went dead. Ellis stared at the phone for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly. In 20 years of military service, he'd never been warned off an investigation so directly or so coldly. Whatever they'd witnessed in that alley, it was connected to operations far above his security clearance. That afternoon, He gathered his team in the secure briefing room one final time. "I want everyone to understand something," Ellis began, his voice carrying unusual weight. "What happened during last week's mission? The specifics of how that target was eliminated. That information is now classified beyond our access level." Torres looked confused. "Sir, we were there. We saw what happened." "What you saw," Ellis said carefully, "was a successful elimination of a high-value target. That's what goes in your records, and that's what you discuss if anyone asks. Nothing else." Peterson understood immediately. "We're being told to forget," Ellis nodded grimly. "We're being told to focus on what matters. The mission succeeded. We all came home safe, and that's the end of the story." Williams raised his hand tentatively. "But sir, what if we run into her again? What if she's assigned to another operation?" "If that happens," Ellis replied, "you treat her with the same professional respect you'd show any operator. You follow orders, you do your job, and you don't ask questions you're not cleared to know the answers to." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They'd been witness to something extraordinary, something that challenged their understanding of what was possible in their profession. But they were also being told, in no uncertain terms, that pursuing answers could be dangerous for their careers, and possibly their lives. Later that night, Ellis lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. He kept replaying the mission in his mind. The impossible shot, the complete silence, the calm professionalism of a woman who could do things that shouldn't be possible. Somewhere out there, he knew, she was already moving toward her next target. Another impossible mission that would be completed with surgical precision and absolute silence. Another group of confused operatives would watch a target fall without understanding how, and the ghost would disappear again, leaving behind nothing but questions that would never be answered. Ellis finally understood why some operations were classified above his pay grade. Some secrets were too dangerous to know, and some people were too valuable to acknowledge. Tomorrow, he would file his report with the simple notation: mission successful. Target eliminated. No casualties. And he would never speak of what he'd really seen in that dusty alley where the impossible became reality. Dawn came early to the forward operating base, painting the desert sky in shades of amber and rose. The sniper team stood outside the main compound in the pre-dawn chill. There, breath forming small clouds in the dry air. None of them had planned to be there, but somehow they'd all arrived to witness her departure. She emerged from the operations building carrying her rifle case with the same casual efficiency they'd observed since her arrival. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a woman walking toward the gate as if she were heading to another routine assignment rather than vanishing into whatever shadows had produced. Captain Ellis was the first to break the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the group. "You could stay for the official debrief," he said, his voice carrying an almost pleading undertone. "Command would want a full tactical analysis of the engagement." She didn't slow her pace toward the perimeter gate. "Not my kind of meeting." Ellis took a few quick steps to keep pace with her. "You realize what you accomplished back there changes everything we thought we knew about long-range engagement, right? We've all tried shots like that. We've all dreamed about making them work. And you," he shook his head in disbelief, "you made it look routine." "I did my job," she cut him off, her eyes focused straight ahead. Her tone was matter-of-fact, but underneath, it carried the weight of someone who'd been having this conversation for years. Behind them, the rest of the team followed at a respectful distance. Some wanted to ask technical questions about her weapon, her ammunition, the mathematics she'd used to calculate that impossible trajectory. Others simply wanted to say thank you. But something in her demeanor discouraged casual conversation. Torres jogged up alongside Ellis. "At least tell us your name, your real name." She stopped walking, and turned to face them for the first time since leaving the building. For a moment, there was the faintest hint of something that might have been amusement in her eyes. "Names don't matter in this work," she said softly. "Only results do." A convoy of 2 unmarked vehicles idled near the main gate, their engines rumbling quietly in the morning air. As they approached, one of the drivers, a man the team didn't recognize, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word of greeting or explanation. Ellis made one final attempt. "The shot you made. How long have you been able to do things like that?" She paused with one hand on the vehicle door. "Long enough to know that some questions don't have answers you'd want to hear. Try me." She studied his face for a moment, as if evaluating how much truth he could handle. "Tell me, Captain, when you close your eyes at night, do you see the faces of the people you've killed?" The question caught Ellis off guard. "Sometimes. I stopped seeing faces a long time ago," she said quietly. "After a while, they're just problems to solve, distances to calculate, environmental factors to account for." She stepped into the vehicle. "That's how you make impossible shots, Captain. You stop thinking of them as impossible." The door closed with a final sound, and the convoy began rolling toward the gate. Within moments, the vehicles had disappeared into the vast desert, leaving nothing but tire tracks in the sand and a group of confused, awed soldiers standing in the early morning light. Peterson was the first to speak. "Anyone else feel like we just met someone who shouldn't exist?" Williams nodded slowly. "I mean, people can't really do what she did. Not without computer assistance, not without advanced targeting systems. It's not humanly possible. But we all saw it," Torres said quietly. "We all watched that target drop without hearing a shot fired." Ellis remained silent, staring at the empty horizon where the convoy had vanished. In his mind, he kept replaying her final words. The casual way she talked about stopping seeing faces, about reducing human beings to mathematical problems. It explained how someone could develop the kind of cold precision necessary for impossible shots. But it also suggested a level of psychological detachment that was almost frightening. Over the following weeks, the team tried to return to normal operations. They ran training exercises, conducted routine patrols, processed intelligence reports. But the memory of that mission hung over them like a shadow. Every time they lined up a long-range shot, someone would remember the complete silence of her engagement. Every time they calculated wind drift or bullet drop, someone would think about her notebook full of equations that went far beyond standard ballistics. Ellis found himself checking classified communication channels obsessively, looking for any hint that she might be assigned to another operation in their area. But there was nothing. No mission reports, no personnel transfers, no operational updates that mentioned an unidentified female sniper. It was as if she had never existed at all. Months later, Ellis would hear rumors from other unit stories about impossible shots made by a woman who appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly. Always different locations, always different targets, always the same result. Clean eliminations that defied conventional understanding of what was possible in their profession. The stories were never official. They were whispered conversations in secure facilities, fragments of rumors passed between operators who'd witnessed things they couldn't explain. But Ellis recognized the pattern. The ghost was still out there, still making impossible shots. For missions that would never appear in any official record. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if she remembered their brief encounter. If she ever thought about the team of confused snipers she'd left behind in that desert base. But he suspected that for someone who'd stopped seeing faces, individual missions and individual soldiers probably blurred together into an endless series of problems solved and targets eliminated. The official report from their mission contained exactly what Ellis had promised. Target neutralized, no casualties, mission successful. But the real story, The story of a woman who could make bullets bend to her will and targets fall without sound. That story lived only in the memories of 5 men who'd witnessed the impossible and been sworn to silence. And somewhere in the world, another high-value target was walking into crosshairs held by steady hands that had long ago stopped trembling. 6 months after the mission that changed everything, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres found himself in a different desert, on a different continent, facing a different impossible shot. The target was a terrorist commander who'd been evading capture for 3 years, and the window of opportunity was exactly the kind that made seasoned snipers shake their heads and request backup. 2.4 kilometers, his spotter reported. Through the scope. Crosswind at 15 knots, gusting to 20. Target will be exposed for maybe 3 seconds when he crosses from the building to the vehicle. Torres adjusted his scope and tried to calm his breathing. It was a difficult shot, but not impossible, not by conventional standards. Yet, as he settled behind his rifle, he found himself thinking about her. About the woman who'd redefined his understanding of what was possible in their profession. He closed his eyes for a moment and tried to feel the environment the way she'd described. Not just measure the wind, but predict how it would shift. Not just calculate the distance, but understand how temperature and humidity would affect his bullet's path. When he opened his eyes and looked through his scope again, something had changed. The shot still looked difficult, but no longer impossible. He could see the environmental factors as interconnected variables rather than separate obstacles. He could sense the rhythm of the wind patterns, the thermal updrafts, the way the air moved between buildings. The target appeared right on schedule. Torres tracked him smoothly, led the target by exactly the right amount, and squeezed the trigger at the perfect moment. The rifle cracked, the target dropped, and his spotter confirmed the hit with quiet satisfaction. Clean kill, the spotter reported. That was a hell of a shot, Torres. But Torres was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about how she'd changed not just what he thought was possible, but how he approached every shot afterward. She'd planted something in his mind, a different way of seeing, a deeper understanding of the relationship between shooter, weapon, and environment. He wasn't the only one. Back at their original base, Captain Ellis had been promoted and transferred to a training command where he worked with the military's most promising sniper candidates. He found himself teaching techniques he'd learned from watching her, even though he could never explain where those techniques came from. Ballistics isn't just mathematics, he would tell his students. It's pattern recognition, environmental awareness. You have to stop thinking of the rifle as a tool and start thinking of it as an extension of your senses. The young snipers would nod and take notes, not understanding that their instructor was passing along wisdom from someone who officially didn't exist. But they absorbed the lessons anyway, and some of them went on to make shots that surprised even their teachers. Peterson had returned to civilian life but found work as a technical consultant for a firearms manufacturer. He spent his days designing suppressor systems and ammunition types that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. His colleagues marveled at his intuitive understanding of ballistic coefficients and acoustic signatures, never suspecting that his innovations were inspired by a weapon he'd seen once, but could never discuss. Williams had been selected for an elite counter-terrorism unit where long-range precision was everything. During his first deployment with the new team, he found himself in an urban environment that reminded him of that day in the desert. When faced with an impossible angle through multiple obstacles, he surprised his new teammates by suggesting an approach that seemed completely unorthodox. "Trust me," he said, settling into a position that looked wrong by conventional standards. "Sometimes the impossible shot is the only one that works." He made the shot, and his team leader asked where. He'd learned to think outside standard doctrine. Williams just smiled, and said he'd picked it up from someone who taught him to see angles differently. The official records of their mission remained classified, buried in files that would probably never see daylight. But the unofficial legacy of that day spread through the special operations community like ripples in water. Techniques that couldn't be explained. Approaches that shouldn't work but did. Questions about the limits of human capability that led to innovations in training and equipment. Years later, Ellis would occasionally hear stories that made him pause and wonder. A terrorist leader who died of apparent natural causes while surrounded by bodyguards, except that the autopsy revealed a single bullet wound that made no ballistic sense. A drug cartel commander who'd collapsed during a public appearance, with witnesses reporting a sound like a car backfiring from several blocks away, but no car was found. Each time, Ellis would remember standing in that morning chill, watching a woman disappear into the desert after doing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about his profession. He would wonder if she was still out there, still making impossible shots for missions that would never be acknowledged. And sometimes, late at night when the wind was blowing just right, he would step outside and try to feel the air the way she had. He would close his eyes and attempt to sense the patterns, the thermal layers, the invisible currents that could carry a bullet to its target with supernatural precision. He never quite achieved what she had demonstrated. None of them did. But they all carried forward the knowledge that impossible was just another word for not yet figured out. That with enough understanding, enough preparation, enough willingness to see beyond conventional limitations, even the most challenging shot could become routine. The ghost had given them more than just a successful mission. She'd given them a new way of thinking about their craft, their capabilities, and the very nature of what it meant to be a precision marksman. And somewhere in the world, she was still out there, still redefining impossible. One silent shot at a time, the legend lived on in whispered conversations between operators who'd witnessed things they couldn't explain, in training techniques that pushed students beyond what they thought they could achieve, in innovations that emerged from the simple question, what if the impossible shot is the only one that matters? Her name, whatever it really was, might never appear in any official record, but her legacy was written in the steady hands and sharp eyes of every sniper who refused to accept that something couldn't be done just because it had never been done before. In the end, that was the most lasting impact of her brief appearance in their lives. The understanding that true mastery meant transcending limitations rather than accepting them. That the difference between possible and impossible was often just a matter of perspective, preparation, and the willingness to see what others couldn't. And in the silence between heartbeats, in the moment when breath becomes stillness and intention becomes action, her influence lived on, teaching a new generation of warriors that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that make no sound at all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.